Thanks for staying with News at Prime tonight. Well, let's stay then with one of our top stories for the day. Data prices in South Africa are expected to fall by as much as 50% within the next 2 months. Of course, that's if the Competition Commission has its way. Network operators could face action from the entity if they fail to negotiate the terms of then these new data prices. Let's discuss this further. I'm joined by the Commission's falling. It's been one of the issues that has been really on the national agenda, and it seems that the Competition Commission now has concrete evidence to be able to fight for that to happen.
That's absolutely right. So the final report has come out today and was handed over to our Minister Patel, who you heard from earlier. But there is certainly sufficient evidence that, based on benchmarking and profitability analysis, that prices are high.
I want us to talk about this benchmarking process because it's one of the things that is mentioned even in terms of the terms of reference of this particular inquiry. How did you benchmark South Africa? Which countries were you benchmarking it against? Because, of course, there's always the argument by those who are, opponents of data falling, saying, well, it's expensive to lay down infrastructure, and you can't compare a country like the US, where there's Wi-Fi available at every street corner, to a country like South Africa.
You're absolutely right that benchmarking, is a difficult process. But I think there's an acceptance that at least what comes through a benchmarking process gives you an indication. So it's not something we wholly rely on, but it's something that is indicative. So we've done a benchmark to most countries globally, to African countries, to BRICS countries. But probably what is one of the more interesting is to countries where MTN and Vodacom operate themselves in the rest of Africa. And that is maybe indicative of different strategies in South Africa, but the South African prices are probably, up to twice as high as the next cheapest. So that is firm evidence, but it's also criticized because do we have enough spectrum here? There are other costs from the coverage, and that's why we relied on profitability measures too. And profitability...
To take a look at the extent to which the communications companies themselves should be held liable for this high cost of data. You, in fact, I think, create a caveat where it comes to policy, because you say the problem that we're sitting with today was started way back then when it came to the policy and the licensing for these network mobile operators.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a legacy, and maybe, it's easy with hindsight to see that, but at the time, more difficult. So at the time, two operators were licensed, but with extensive coverage requirements, and there may be a degree of regulatory failure once other entrants have entered the market. Some of those have been addressed, but I think we see this continual advantage, and that's why the same market shares perpetuate year after year. But it's also why, I suppose, we're looking at some sort of call to action and a pact with the operators. Rather than us litigating this out over many years, I think consumers need that relief now, and we're willing to oversee that process, even if it means we forgo fines and other penalties.
Why is it that competitors such as your Telkom Mobile and your Cell C have not necessarily been that strong in breaking that monopoly and in reducing the price of data?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. So in the past, because they don't have the same extensive network, they're still building that out. And we found those roaming agreements, the prices for those were frequently above the retail costs of the Vodacom or MTN who was providing roaming, and much higher than actual costs or even what Cell C or Telkom may be charging the consumers. So that, in a sense, hinders you in trying to be aggressive on price and winning over customers. So it's a process where, ironically, in the telecom sector, you rely on your biggest competitor to also get access to the market.
Sure. And of course, I think for me, one of the more worrying things, especially from a human level, and we now live in a world where access to internet is considered a basic human right. The discrimination that you've also found when it comes to access to data, particularly for those in the lower income market, and the extent to which they are disadvantaged by the price pricing of these companies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That was a provisional finding as well. But I suppose digging deeper, what we found is, in fact, that consumers have had to increasingly go to what's termed short validity bundles, so daily, hourly bundles, in order to find affordable prices. To the extent that, you know, almost 3/4 or 80% of purchases by low-income consumers are exactly those bundles. Now, that doesn't give you access day after day, hour after hour. And I think you're absolutely right. As the economy and the globe moves towards online, you have to be online. To register your kids for schools in Gauteng, you need to be online. To apply to university, you need to be online. Almost everything has moved in that. So to be part of a democracy, to be part of an economy, that's necessary.
Of course, now the criticism that has been leveled against the Competition Commission is around the fact that in the recommendations, you're not just saying that these companies must slash the prices of data, but you are in fact saying that you must be part of the process. It's almost an instruction more than it is a recommendation. And there are concerns about whether or not, as a body, you should even be playing in that space and why you should be given an opportunity to have a say, at least to the extent that you're proposing here.
Look, I think it is part of a general approach we've adopted where we would rather reach agreement and have the benefit of lower prices sooner, rather than just doggedly pursuing a prosecution case, which might lead to lower prices in a year or 2 years' time and big penalties. Reductions now. But by allowing operators to engage, we can have that conversation to also ensure that those reductions are in the right place, affect the right consumers, and also, you know, ensure that the operators are able to still continue to invest and enjoy the business environment.
But for a country that then, I think to a huge extent, promotes principles of a free market, do you think that this decision in any way then jeopardizes that, in the sense that you are actively now getting involved here, companies that have become in many ways multinationals?
Look, I think it's never been about completely free market. There's a global acceptance that there's a role for regulation, and just the Competition Act demonstrates that. There are companies that may have too much market power, and this may be the case in point here, where in fact they exploit that market power and exploit the consumers. So there is a need to have a regulator temper that. And I think that's completely within the role of the Competition Commission to do that. So it's not deviating, in a sense, from the general market economy model. But it is saying that we need to rein in these excessive prices, because low prices also result in better economic growth, more inclusive growth, and those are also important goals within the economy.
Are you getting yourselves ready for a legal onslaught, as it were, from the likes of Vodacom and MTN in opposing, firstly, just this inquiry itself and perhaps even wanting to take its findings on review?
Look, we are always prepared for any sort of litigation, and we would have considered all those factors. But that's where we think, as I said, I think there is a way through this where everyone can come to the party and we can move forward from that. Litigation is never the best outcome. But if we have to go down that route, then you are opening up to large fines and potentially civil damages claims.
Do you foresee, in terms of the engagements that you've had with these companies so far, do you have reason to believe that they might choose the route that you're proposing without you having to take them to the tribunal, then, you know, or that they might consider their legal options?
Look, I'm sure they will consider their legal options.
Sure.
You know, as any probably responsible company, you would do that. And you'd have to sit as a board or executive management and decide what is the best route through. And much like we would do the same as an institution.
But have they been cooperative in this process?
They have been cooperative. They've provided information. They do obviously disagree with many of the findings, no doubt. But as part of the process, they have been providing us with data and information, and that's partly what has formed the foundation for the findings.
Sure. In a moment then, I want us to continue the conversation and specifically speak about spectrum, because that has been a key finding of this report, and the role of ICASA in all of that, and the extent to which then they also become a focus as an outcome of this inquiry that you have run. And of course, I'm in conversation with James Hodge. There seems to be some success when it comes to the quest to get data prices to fall. You'd remember, it was also a big issue, especially going into elections this year. It seemed to be on the agenda for many political parties. It was also around about the time that we had of this report issued. So yeah, it's now the ball, I suppose, is in the court of the network providers themselves in terms of how they respond to this report. But in a moment then, I will continue our conversation. You're live on News at Prime.